A pair of seagulls glided around high up in the clear blue sky. Their calls softly pierced the steady sound of waves washing ashore. Rarity watched the birds lazily. Her body was toasty warm, and her head was leaned back to see skyward. She felt a gentle pat on her chest from above a layer of sand. Applejack sat next to her on the beach. She had buried Rarity in the sand up to her neck and was patting down the top of the mound which housed her mare friend. Rarity let out a long yawn.
My stars, this sand is so warm it makes you sleepy.
She closed her eyes and slowly rolled her neck, feeling a little tension release itself. Her eyes fluttered back open and looked out over the sea.
Not to mention the week I just had. I am beat.
I thought you were Rarity. Rarity blinked. She looked over to AJ.
I beg your pardon?
Applejack leaned her head on her hoof and grinned. Said you was beat. Don't remember dating a vegetable, though. Applejack looked up at the sky and scratched her chin. Though you'd probably fit more as a turnip. You know, with the white coat and all. More blinks from Rarity.
Is that supposed to be a joke? It's not even groan-worthy, darling.
Rarity watched as her girlfriend shrugged. Rarity gave a teasing glance.
You're turning into your grandmother, Applejack.
A snort of laughter escaped the farm pony. She laid herself over her partner's buried torso, creating an odd-looking X on the shoreline. I sure am, she said, feeling the warmth of the buried treasure beneath her body. Spent my morning with Granny.
Oh?
AJ replied, her eyes closed as she lowered her head and stretched out her back. She wanted my help updating her will.
Oh my, that's certainly dark. Are you feeling okay?
Said the head in the sand. She could barely move her head, but managed to stretch far enough to plant a light peck on Applejack's side. A squeaky yelp came out of AJ as she shot up onto all fours. Rarity, you know I'm ticklish.
Sorry.
She took a deep breath and lowered herself back down before turning to Rarity and booping her slightly on the nose. A white pillowy cloud rolled gently into view as Rarity leaned her head back once more. The birds seemed to be moving on, their caws no longer audible.
So, do you have a will?
Rarity could feel AJ stir at the break in the silence. No, ain't really planning on dying anytime soon.
Good.
Rarity looked down to see AJ smile. Green eyes moved to meet hers. What about you?
Actually, I do.
Applejack seemed surprised by this. She turned her body, wrapping herself around the pony-sized mound of sand. Her hoof once again propped up her chin. Really? She said, and sounded intrigued.
Yes, my darling. If anything happened, Celestia forbid, there are certain things I need to know will be taken care of. Ponies, too.
More clouds rolled into view, as Rarity thought. The waves were beginning to get closer to the pair as well.
I would have Coco and Sassy inherit the stores, and enough money to keep them afloat. Or liquidize them if they decided to. It would be their choice, and that's fine.
Makes sense. Rarity nodded before continuing.
Besides that, I have my parents and Sweetie, seeing enough money to make sure they are taken care of and comfortable. Then, of course, I have a similar amount set aside for you.
Applejack's facial expression changed at that last statement. Wait, why am I on there? She said, cocking her head ever so slightly. Rarity blinked again.
Well, I don't know if you've noticed, but I am somewhat teensy little bit kind of completely in love with you.
AJ smiled and laid her head down in the sand.
Applejack, you are my other half. There's no way around it. You're a big part of my life.
I know that. And I really love hearing you say that. I don't think you should leave me anything that way. That struck a chord with Rarity. She realized that it may have come off, that she thought her dear Applejack couldn't support herself if something were to happen. Rarity leaned forward, looking at her life partner intently. Applejack drew closer to her, as if pulled by a magnet. Their noses touched as each pony closed their eyes.
Please don't misunderstand. I don't mean to imply your family needs anything from me.
She leaned in and kissed AJ softly.
I know more than most ponies the integrity of the Apple family business.
Buttering me up, aren't you?
Is that bad?
I don't mind at all, shook Cube. The sky was now overcast. A wave approached the two ponies before retreating back to the sea. Rarity opened her eyes, and Applejack pulled back to rest her chin under her hoof again. Rarity let out a yawn.
It's a shame they don't have any of those sea salt ice creams up at the boardwalk,
she said sleepily.
You know those are my...
She stopped talking before tilting her head. Applejack probably didn't realize it, but she was making a bit of a face.
Is something troubling you?
Applejack paused, then turned to answer. No, she said in an awkward tone of voice, while still very much making a bit of a face. Her eyes stuck to her partner. Rarity leaned her head down and raised her eyebrow. That is not true.
No kidding,
said Rarity, rolling her eyes.
It sure is a good thing you aren't one for secrets, dear. Honestly, now out with it.
She gave a stern look. Applejack let out a sigh. She rolled over onto her back and looked up at the clouds. It's nothing bad. It's just, I've got this weird feeling in me, now that I know that. Like, if you were to pass, the thought that there's some mystery lump of bits that would just show up at my door. She lifted her front hooves up and moved them about while talking. I just picture some banker knocking on the front door of the farm. Oh, hey, your mare friend is dead? So here's this. And then there's just this big bag of bits, I guess.
Darling, I think they would just send a check.
Rarity deadpanned.
Ponies generally don't pay with bags of cash. I'm not the mafia.
She gave Applejack a teasing grin, but dropped it quickly. AJ was looking away with a somber expression.
Oh, I'm sorry. I know I teased you too much. I said I would be better about that.
A soft tone of regret ran through her words. She gave an apologetic look as Applejack turned back to her. No, you're fine, sweetheart. Applejack closed her eyes and smiled for a moment. Thank you for remembering, though. It means a lot. Her eyes opened to a Rarity trying her hardest not to be visibly proud of herself. The sound of the waves from behind her became more noticeable.
So, still the money thing?
Said Rarity, clearing her throat. I think so. Applejack got up and walked to the side of the buried pony. Setting her Stetson down as a headrest first, she laid back on the beach next to her. Just a weird thing I can't picture.
I can tell you how much it is. Would that help, darling?
Rarity, no, you don't have to do that.
It's not a big deal. It's not like a birthday present, dear. You could just go to town hall and look it up.
Can?
Applejack, if I'm willing money to you, I would say that I trust you enough to see the will with your own gosh darn name on it.
Applejack snorted with laughter, as Rarity looked quite pleased with herself. The sky was darkening ever so slightly. Waves crawled up only a few feet from the couple. All right, shoot. Rarity nodded. She craned her neck over and spoke quietly into AJ's ear. Applejack's eyes widened. Rarity moved her head back to look at the sky once again.
Oh, drat! It's starting to get dark.
She lowered her view.
Oh my, it also seems the tide is coming in.
Rarity? Was that a joke? That's not a real number, right? Rarity looked around in confusion, then to Applejack.
No, that's the number, love.
Applejack looked at her hooves. Heavens to Betsy.
What is it?
AJ looked back at her mare friend. Oh, I didn't realize how much money you actually have. Rarity grinned sheepishly, blushing slightly.
Darling, I run stores in Manhattan and Canterlot. You had to know that I was at least somewhat well off.
Applejack continued to gawk at the monumental royalty she apparently willed. Rarity winced as a tiny splash of water hit her mane.
Okay, darling, the tide has officially come in. I think it's high time we make our way back to the boardwalk.
We could rebuild the barns for every pony in the family, AJ muttered to herself, still in a daze.
Darling, would you be so kind and unbury me now?
And health insurance for, mumbled Applejack. Before stopping herself, she stood up slowly, then looked down at the head in the sand.
Hello?
Said Rarity, with a gentle smile. Applejack felt the water wash over her back hooves. Rarity watched as Applejack looked back towards the land, then down at her again.
Darling?
Applejack walked slowly around the buried pony.
Applejack!
She could hear the pitter-patter of hoofsteps growing quieter behind her head. She looked down as a wave brushed up against her neck.
Applejack!
The sound of the ocean grew louder in her mind. She leaned her head back as far as possible. Her breath quickened.
Some pony, help!
Makeup ran down her face as she began to bawl.
Why me? What?
Rarity immediately ceased all noise when she felt a tap on her head. She turned to see Applejack standing beside her. She had a blue popsicle with a stick in her mouth. Magic, she managed to say without moving her teeth. Rarity blinked.
Right. Sure.
Her horn glowed a faint blue as the confection levitated above the two ponies. With that, AJ approached her side and put her front hooves down into the sand. After barely a second of digging, Applejack reached down and wrapped her hooves around Rarity's midsection.
What are you... Oh!
Rarity said, her voice jumping up an octave as she was plucked from her sandy grave. 4 hooves now on the ground, Rarity levitated the popsicle next to her head and took a lick.
Sea salt ice cream?
She looked towards AJ and noticed something behind her in the distance. A blue stallion was pushing some sort of cart back towards the boardwalk. Sorry, he was about to close.
Right.
Replied Rarity, drier and squinting her eyes. You okay, Rares? Applejack stepped over and placed a hoof on Rarity's back, rubbing gently. How do you feel? Rarity let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding in. She looked down at the hole in the sand and scoffed.
Like a turnip.
Applejack lowered her head, snickering. Rarity walked out from AJ's hold, humming to herself. She walked away, down the shore just a bit, so her mare friend would still be able to hear her. She grinned slyly, then turned her head halfway back to Applejack.
At least I'm not a literal gold digger.
She turned and started down the beach, laughing heartily as she did. She smiled to herself as she heard the fast-approaching gallop of one angry farmer behind her.
Don't you just turn away and walk from me. I'm gonna snuggle you.